Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you right now, you could be holding on to someone who's blocking the life you're meant to live? What if the very person you're fighting to keep is the reason you're not stepping into your destiny? I want you to lean in, because today we're talking about 5 undeniable signs God doesn't want you with someone. And let me be clear, this isn't about judgment, this is about freedom. This is about knowing when to walk away so that you can walk into the life you were created for. Sign 1, you're losing yourself. When you have to shrink who you are to fit into someone else's world, pay attention. Because the right person will never make you question your worth. If you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to speak your truth, ask yourself, is this what God intended for me? You were not created to live small. And anyone who makes you feel less than your full potential is not aligned with your purpose. Sign 2. Your peace is gone. Listen carefully. God is not the author of confusion. If you're in a relationship that keeps you in a constant state of anxiety, ask yourself, is this love or is this a prison? Real love brings peace. It brings clarity. If you're always overthinking, always doubting, always drained, that's not love. That's chaos. And let me tell you something. Chaos is not your calling. Sign 3, you're being pulled away from your purpose. God will never send someone into your life to distract you from the very thing He created you to do. If this relationship is pulling you away from your dreams, your values, or your faith, that's not divine alignment. A healthy relationship is not a cage, it's a catalyst. It should push you closer to your calling, not further away. Sign 4, you keep ignoring the red flags. You see them, you feel them, but you're hoping they'll change. Let me be honest with you, people can change, but it's not your job to fix them. And when God shows you the truth, it's not to hurt you, it's to free you. Don't stay in a place that's breaking you just because you're afraid to be alone. Sometimes letting go is not losing, it's trusting that God has something better. Sign 5, you can't hear God's voice anymore. When you're with the wrong person, the noise of dysfunction drowns out the voice of God. If your prayers feel empty, if your spirit feels heavy, that's a sign, because the right relationship will never pull you away from your connection with your Creator. If you're feeling distant from God, it may be time to get honest about who you're holding on to. So here's the question I need you to ask yourself. Am I holding on to what God is trying to release me from? Because every moment you spend with the wrong person is a moment stolen from the right one. If any of these signs resonate with you, maybe it's time to let go. Not because it's easy, but because you deserve a love that reflects the greatness within you. God's plan for your life is too big to be compromised by the wrong relationship, lack of peace, and constant anxiety. When God is at the center of something, there is peace. A kind of peace that transcends understanding, that settles your heart and quiets your mind. But when you're with someone who isn't meant for you, that peace feels distant, almost unreachable. Instead, you feel an unsettling restlessness creeping in, anxiety that lingers, even when things seem fine on the surface. You may smile on the outside, but deep down, something feels off. It's that gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach, the tension in your chest that you can't shake. No matter how much you try to rationalize it or push those feelings aside, it doesn't go away. This isn't the kind of temporary nervousness that comes with normal relationship challenges. It's deeper, more persistent. It shows up in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. It's there when you lie awake at night, questioning if this is truly right. It's there when you pray, hoping for clarity, but instead of peace, all you feel is heaviness. That lack of peace is God's way of getting your attention. His way of whispering that something isn't aligned with His purpose for you. And the truth is, God doesn't operate in confusion or chaos. When He brings two people together, there is unity, not inner turmoil. But when you're forcing a connection that isn't meant to be, you'll feel it. The more you ignore that lack of peace, the louder it gets. Through missed red flags, through conversations that leave you drained, through moments where you know deep down that you're settling for something less than what God has for you. God's love doesn't come with confusion. His plan won't require you to live in constant anxiety or emotional turmoil. That unrest is not something to dismiss. It's a signal, a warning, a gentle but firm reminder that the peace you're longing for can't be found in someone God never intended to walk with you. And when you sense that, it's not something to overlook or brush aside, because God's guidance often comes in the form of that still small voice, nudging you, calling you to something better, something greater, something that won't leave you questioning your worth or wondering if you're loved, compromising your values and faith. When God places a calling on your life, He also gives you a standard, a foundation built on truth, integrity, and faith. But when you find yourself in a relationship where those values begin to bend, where your convictions become negotiable, something is deeply wrong. Love should never require you to sacrifice who you are in Christ. It should never pull you away from the things that anchor your soul or make you question the beliefs that have carried you through life's hardest moments. Yet, when you're with someone who isn't aligned with God's plan, the compromise often starts small, so subtle you almost don't notice it. At first, it's a conversation where you stay quiet to avoid conflict, even when your spirit knows you should speak up. Then it's missing a prayer, skipping a church service, silencing that inner voice to keep the peace. And over time, those small compromises begin to erode your spiritual identity. You find yourself making excuses, telling yourself it's not that serious, that you can handle it, that things will change, but deep down, you know. You feel the tension between who you are and who you're becoming to make the relationship work. God never intended for love to weaken your faith. True, God-centered love strengthens it. It pushes you closer to Him, not farther away. But when you're constantly battling between your heart and your values, when you feel torn between pleasing a person and obeying God, it's a sign you're walking a path He never intended for you. And the danger is that the longer you stay, the easier it becomes to justify the compromise. What once seemed unthinkable starts to feel normal. And every time you ignore that inner conviction, your spirit grows quieter and the distance between you and God widens. God's love won't ask you to sacrifice your principles. It won't pressure you to do things that violate your conscience or make you feel ashamed of your faith. If being with someone pulls you away from prayer, weakens your relationship with God, or causes you to hide who you are spiritually, you're not in the relationship He designed for you. And no amount of chemistry, no level of emotional connection is worth losing the peace that comes from living in alignment with your beliefs. Because when you compromise your faith for someone else, you don't just lose a piece of yourself, you lose the clarity, the confidence, and the spiritual covering that comes from walking in obedience to God's voice. Closed doors and constant obstacles. When God is at work in your life, He opens doors no one can shut, and He shuts doors no one can open. But when you're in a relationship that isn't part of His divine plan, you will start to notice a pattern. Doors that once seemed wide open begin to close. Opportunities that should flow smoothly become battles. And no matter how much effort you pour into making things work, it feels like you're pushing against a wall that refuses to move. It's easy to dismiss these roadblocks as normal struggles, but when obstacles keep appearing, when the relationship feels like an uphill climb with no relief, it may be something more than coincidence. You try harder, you pray longer, you compromise more. Instead of break through, you face more resistance. Every step forward feels like you're being pulled 2 steps back. Plans fall apart unexpectedly. Conversations lead to misunderstandings. No matter how much you try to hold things together, life keeps unraveling around you. And if you pay attention, you'll realize these obstacles aren't random. They're warnings, divine interventions disguised as closed doors, because God is too loving to let you settle in a place that was never meant to hold you. Sometimes those closed doors are God's way of protecting you from a future you can't yet see. He knows what lies ahead, the heartbreak, the pain, the things you would lose if you stayed where you don't belong. And so He allows the obstacles to rise, not to punish you, but to redirect you, to show you that no matter how much you force a connection, if it's not His will, it will never prosper. And the harder you fight against those closed doors, the more exhausted your spirit becomes, because you were never meant to chase what he's trying to remove. When God wants you to let go, he doesn't always shout it from the heavens. Sometimes he speaks through the frustration you feel when nothing works, through the endless arguments that leave you drained, through the plans that never seem to come together, and no matter how much you try to fix it, the pieces never quite fit. Because when something is truly meant for you, it won't require you to constantly fight against divine resistance. It won't trap you in cycles of disappointment and struggle. It won't feel like you're begging for what should flow freely. God's love moves with purpose. It opens doors that no human hand can shut. But when you're trying to hold on to something he's calling you to release, he will block the path until you recognize that your future cannot thrive in a place he has not blessed. And if you keep pushing, if you keep ignoring the signs, those closed doors will only become louder, clearer, and more painful, until you finally realize that what you're chasing isn't worth the price of losing the peace and purpose God has waiting for you. Lack of growth and purpose. When God brings the right person into your life, they won't just love you, they will push you to become the best version of yourself. They will challenge you to grow, to stretch beyond your comfort zone, to pursue the purpose God has placed within you. But when you're in a relationship that stifles your growth, that dims your light instead of helping it shine brighter, something is wrong. Love, real, God-centered love, doesn't hold you back. It doesn't keep you small. It doesn't make you abandon your calling to make someone else comfortable. Yet when you're with someone who isn't aligned with God's plan, you'll feel the weight of stagnation. Your dreams begin to shrink. Your vision becomes blurry. The things you were once passionate about start to fade because you're too busy trying to maintain a relationship that drains you instead of pouring into you. You start to settle not just in love, but in life. The goals you once chased with boldness feel out of reach. The spiritual hunger you once had begins to fade because instead of drawing closer to God, you're distracted by a relationship that pulls your focus away. And maybe you tell yourself it's just a season. Maybe you convince yourself things will change. But deep down, you know this isn't growth. It's confinement. It's as if your spirit is suffocating under the weight of a love that was never meant to carry you into your destiny. God didn't create you to stay stuck in a place where you can't grow. He didn't design you to abandon your purpose, to hold on to a relationship that is shrinking your potential. And if you're constantly sacrificing your dreams, your calling, your identity, just to keep someone in your life, that's not love, that's bondage. God's plan for your life is too important to be placed on hold. The gifts he's given you are meant to be used to impact lives, to bring glory to his name. And the person he has for you will never make you choose between love and purpose. They will walk beside you, encouraging you to rise higher, to chase after God with everything you have. But when you're in a relationship that limits your growth, when you find yourself drifting further from your calling, losing the fire you once had, it's not by accident. It's a sign, a divine warning that you're planting your life in soil where you were never meant to grow. And the longer you stay, the more you lose. You lose time, you lose energy, you lose pieces of the person God called you to be. Because a relationship that isn't from him will always require you to compromise the very essence of who you are. And no matter how much you try to make it work, you'll always feel the tension, the war between who you are and who you're becoming to fit a relationship that was never meant to carry your purpose. Because when God calls you to something greater, he will not allow you to remain in a place that stifles your destiny. And when you start to feel that restlessness, the deep ache for more, for purpose, for freedom, that's not something to ignore. It's God's way of telling you that he has more for you. And you cannot step into your future while holding on to something that's keeping you from growing into the person he created you to be. Inner conviction and spiritual discernment, God speaks in many ways through his word, through wise counsel, through circumstances, but one of the most powerful ways he guides you is through the quiet voice within. That deep, unshakable conviction that rises up when something isn't right. It's not just a passing doubt or fleeting insecurity, it's a persistent knowing, a spiritual alarm that won't let you settle. And when you're in a relationship that isn't meant for you, that conviction doesn't fade. It grows louder, stronger, clearer with every step you take. At first, you may try to dismiss it. You tell yourself you're overthinking, that no relationship is perfect, that maybe you're being too cautious. You pray for peace, but instead, you feel an unease that lingers long after the prayers are finished. It's there in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. It's there when you're smiling on the outside but wrestling on the inside. It's there when you try to convince yourself everything is fine, yet something in your spirit won't agree. That's not fear. That's not insecurity. That's the Holy Spirit, gently but firmly trying to protect you from something your heart may want, but your spirit cannot accept. God is not the author of confusion. When He brings two people together, there is alignment, not just of hearts, but of purpose, of values, of vision. But when you're with someone who isn't part of His plan, that inner conviction will disrupt your comfort, challenging you to see the truth beneath the surface. And no matter how much you try to silence it, the more you pray, the more He will reveal. Conversations that once felt harmless will begin to feel heavy. Moments that once brought joy will start to feel forced. You'll notice things you once ignored, subtle compromises, lingering doubts, red flags you try to explain away, and those signs are not accidents, they are divine interruptions, calling your attention to what your heart wants to deny. And if you keep ignoring that conviction, the weight will grow heavier. God will not let you have peace with something He never intended for you. You may try to rationalize, to justify, to cling to the hope that things will change. But deep down, your spirit already knows, because when you belong to God, He will not allow you to settle in a place that threatens your calling, your character, or your relationship with Him. That conviction is His mercy. It is His protection. It is His way of saying, I have something better for you, but you cannot receive it while holding on to what was never meant to stay. And the truth is, when you ask God for clarity, He will always answer, but you have to be willing to listen. You have to trust that still small voice, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it hurts, even when your heart longs to stay. Because God sees what you cannot see. He knows the future that lies ahead, the pain that could break you, the distractions that could derail you. And because He loves you, He will not let you walk blindly into destruction. And the longer you fight against that conviction, the harder the journey becomes. Not because God is punishing you, but because He is trying to release you from something that is holding you back from the fullness of what He has prepared. So when you feel that deep inner conviction, when your spirit is restless despite your best efforts to hold on, it is not something to ignore. It is God's voice calling you higher. It is His Spirit guarding your heart. It is divine discernment reminding you that real love will never require you to silence His voice or betray the peace that only comes from walking in obedience. And no matter how much it hurts to let go, no matter how much your heart resists, one thing is certain, what God has for you will never come with constant confusion, and the path He calls you to will always be marked by His peace, His purpose, and His undeniable presence. Toxic patterns and emotional drain, love was never meant to break you. It was never meant to leave you questioning your worth, doubting your value, or carrying the heavy weight of emotional exhaustion. When God designs a relationship, it reflects His heart, a love that builds, restores, and strengthens. But when you find yourself trapped in a cycle of toxic patterns, constantly feeling drained instead of uplifted, that is not God's best for you. And no matter how much you try to excuse it, ignore it, or convince yourself things will get better, the truth remains, love that comes from God does not leave you emotionally depleted. At first, the toxicity may be subtle, a harsh word here, an unkind action there. You brush it off as a bad day or a misunderstanding, but over time, those small moments become a pattern, an ongoing cycle where your heart is repeatedly wounded. It's the same argument that never gets resolved, the same feelings of being unseen, unheard, unappreciated, the same emotional roller coaster where one day you feel cherished and the next you feel discarded. And the more you endure, the more you begin to lose yourself, your joy, your peace, your sense of who God created you to be. God did not call you to live in a constant state of turmoil. A healthy, God-centered relationship nurtures your spirit. It does not destroy it. But when you are constantly walking on eggshells, second-guessing your feelings and battling exhaustion from the emotional weight you carry, that is a red flag you cannot afford to ignore. Love should never be a battlefield where you fight to be respected. It should never feel like you're begging for basic kindness, trust, or honesty. Yet toxic patterns will keep you stuck, making you believe that if you just try harder, pray longer, love deeper, things will change. But here's the truth. You cannot fix what someone else refuses to acknowledge. And you cannot heal in an environment that continues to wound you. And the danger of staying in a toxic relationship is that it drains more than just your emotions, it drains your spirit. It makes you question your worth and blinds you to the reality that you were made for more. It distracts you from your God-given purpose because you're too consumed with managing chaos instead of walking in your calling. Toxic love keeps you in survival mode, constantly pouring out while receiving little in return, leaving you depleted and disconnected from the peace God intended for you to carry. When God is in a relationship, there is freedom, not bondage. There is clarity, not confusion. There is healing, not harm. But when toxicity takes root, it will choke the life out of everything good within you. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to see yourself clearly. You begin to normalize dysfunction. You accept things you once knew were unacceptable. And piece by piece, you start to shrink, to silence your voice, to suppress your feelings, to settle for less than the abundant love God wants to give you. God's best for you will never require you to endure constant pain just to prove your loyalty. His design for love does not involve manipulation, emotional exhaustion, or cycles of disrespect disguised as passion. And if you find yourself drained, broken, and distant from the person God called you to be, it is time to ask yourself, what is this relationship really costing me? Because no relationship, no matter how much history you share or how deep your feelings run, is worth losing your peace, your purpose, or your connection to God. And the truth is, when you are walking with God, He will not allow you to remain blind forever. He will reveal the truth through your pain. He will let the patterns repeat until you can no longer deny them. He will stir your spirit with a restlessness that will not be silenced until you recognize that what you're holding on to is breaking you more than it is blessing you. And when you finally have the courage to let go, to release what is draining you, you make space for the healing, the freedom, and the kind of love that reflects God's heart for you. Because His love restores, it rebuilds, it never leaves you empty, and it never requires you to lose yourself in the process. When God doesn't want you with someone, He will show you through lack of peace, compromised values, closed doors, stagnant growth, inner conviction, and toxic patterns. These signs aren't meant to hurt you, they're meant to protect you. God's love is not confusing, draining, or destructive. It is peaceful, uplifting, and aligned with your purpose. Trust His guidance, even when it's hard. Let go of what pulls you away from Him, because His plans are always greater than anything you leave behind. When you release the wrong person, you make room for the right one, someone who reflects God's best for you.